1 minute warning. Are we recording, Cindy? Okay, it is actually 12:59, but I think we can get started. I want to welcome everyone here on a beautiful sunny Saturday afternoon. Obviously, zoning bylaw is important enough for us to all be here. This is a document that we need to get right. And with your help, that's exactly what we will do. We'll get it right. So I have a little speech I have to say here. Glenn Tunnick is our planner, and those of you who've been around for a while will remember that Glenn was our planner way back and he's resurfaced. Sometimes that's a good thing, right? Okay, so today's meeting is a public open house meeting held under the authority of Section 26 and 34 of the Planning Act. This meeting was also advertised in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. The purpose of the meeting is to consult with the public on the draft of an update to the township's comprehensive zoning bylaw. The update is a requirement of the Planning Act and follows from the recent approval of the official plan for the Township of Central Frontenac. The format of the open house is as follows. Glenn Tunnick, our planning consultant, will make a presentation on the proposed changes to the zoning bylaw. Members of the public may ask questions during or after the presentation. Any member of the public may also make a formal presentation after the consultant's presentation. Before you ask a question or make a presentation, I would ask that you state your name and address so this can be recorded by the clerk, and this will protect your appeal rights under the Planning Act. Today's open house will be followed by a second open house on Thursday, August the 18th from 6 p.m. until 9. A statutory public meeting will be held on the final draft in September, followed by adoption of the amending bylaw. Please note that a copy of the draft changes to the bylaw is posted on the township's website. I am required by the Planning Act to advise you that if you do not make an oral presentation or submit written comments before the amending bylaw is passed, you will not be entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the Township of Central Frontenac to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And I will turn the meeting over to Glenn Tunnick for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor and members of the public. It's a pleasure to be here. And before I start, I want to acknowledge the time and effort that's been spent by township staff working very, very hard to help with this process. It's not just me, it's a team effort, and I'm particularly impressed with the work that's been done by township staff. I also want to thank council for the opportunity to come back, resurface. I just kind of pulled out of retirement, but one of the reasons for that is I was the author of the original zoning bylaw, and so I do have some familiarity with it. And of course, it worked with that bylaw for a number of years in terms of evaluating applications for development throughout the township. So with the assistance of staff, we'll move through the presentation. And as the mayor has said, if you have a question as we go along, don't hesitate to put your hand up and we'll try and respond to that question, because sometimes you can forget what the question might be by the time the presentation is over. So as the mayor has pointed out, and it's shown on the first slide, a zoning bylaw is a regulatory document that's passed under Section 34 of the Planning Act. And it governs the use of land, buildings, and structures. It does not deal with the matters in the building code. In other words, it doesn't deal with the types of construction materials used. Next slide. Why an update? Again, as mentioned by the good mayor, an update is required within 3 years of the approval of an official plan or an update to an official plan, and that's the case here. But it's also an opportunity to fine tune the bylaw. The bylaw has been in place for some 10, 12 years, whatever, and there's always a need to make some adjustments here and there, and to also modernize the bylaw. When we drafted the original bylaw, we weren't talking about cannabis. It wasn't a subject at that particular time, but cannabis is a subject, and there's a lot of other items that are new and existing or new circumstances that you have to deal with. It's also an opportunity to consolidate amendments that have occurred to the bylaws since it was as adopted as well. And there's a bit of a freebie here too, is that if there are development proposals out there that you want to incorporate into the bylaw. That is to say, to rezone a particular parcel that you proposed for, maybe commercial development or something of that sort. This is your opportunity to do so free of charge, in the sense that we can build development proposals into the updated bylaw without a cost to the person or parties that want that particular amendment. Next slide. The final product will be an updated zoning bylaw. Now, I want to very specifically indicate that it's going to be an amendment to the existing zoning bylaw. It's not a brand new bylaw. It's an amendment to the existing bylaw, and only the changes in that amendment are appealable. You cannot go back and appeal something that is not changed. So most of what is in the comprehensive bylaw will remain as is. So you can only appeal, as I say, any changes or amendments to the bylaw. So the intent is to have an updated bylaw to bylaw 2011-52. And it will include new schedules. All of the schedules have been changed for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which is to incorporate the consolidation of the amendments that have been made to the bylaw, to also make it more user friendly by labeling trails, parks, and things of that nature to make it easier for people to understand. So the final bylaw will be, as I say, an update of the existing bylaw, consolidating with the new changes and new schedules. Next slide, please. So in terms of appeals, the process under the Planning Act, you can appeal, as I say, only changes to the bylaw. So the public may be requested to be notified of a decision if the request is made in writing to the clerk. Appeals have to be filed within 20 days of the adoption of the bylaw. So if the bylaw is adopted and at this particular point in time, it looks like it might be the last council meeting in September, you would have 20 days from that date to appeal the bylaw or the section of the bylaw that you're concerned with. The appeal fee is $400. Currently, that's payable to the Minister of Finance. Subsequent to any appeal that's filed, the clerk would lodge the appeal with the Ontario Land Tribunal. However, there is a new change to the Planning Act, I guess about 2 or 3 years ago, that allows for a dispute resolution process. So that is to say, if there are one or more individuals that have concerns and have appealed, but there may be some solution to to the process without going to the Ontario Land Tribunal, the municipality can suspend the 20 days and make it actually 75 days in which to negotiate or to come to a settlement on concerns that have been raised. So there's some flexibility in the Planning Act. But if that's not successful, ultimately it's the Ontario Land Tribunal that makes the final decision, and a hearing would be held right here in this very location, which would provide the opportunity for concerns to be raised and your appeal discussed. Next slide, please. Okay. So the characteristics of zoning, as I said, it regulates the use of land, buildings, and structure, but not building materials. Zoning is not retroactive. So if you have a property that has a non-compliant or non-conforming use by virtue of the adoption of the zoning bylaw, we can't force you to comply with the current requirements of the bylaw. That's not permitted. Zoning presumes a use of right, which means that if your property is a vacant property and it's zoned R1, as an example, you can build. You're authorized to build a dwelling on that particular property, obviously, as long as you meet the requirements of the zone and the building code requirements. Zoning is precise. So when a zoning bylaw says there's a minimum of a 6-meter setback from your front lot line, it's not 5.9 or 6.1, it's 6. And it's important to point out that if a use is not listed as a permitted use, it is de facto not permitted. And that's one of the reasons why we've incorporated into this bylaw storage containers, because they were not dealt with in the previous bylaw. So if you're proposing a use of land that's not listed in any of the zones, and perhaps there's not even a definition of that, it's de facto a prohibited use unless the bylaw is amended. Next slide. So land uses within the same zone are dealt with uniformly and consistently. So it doesn't matter whether you have a lot area of 1 hectare or 2 hectares. If it's zoned for a residential use, then you can use the residential use, provided you meet whatever the standards are. So it doesn't matter whether you're, as I say, on a lot of 2 acres or 5 acres or 1 hectare or 3 hectares, as the case may be. Typically, zones a zone to existing uses, and that's one of the important things to state here is that you should review the the zoning schedules to make sure that the zone that applies to your property is in fact the correct zone, and and as I say, the zone in question usually applies to what exists on the land. There's no restriction in the number of zones municipality may incorporate into their bylaw. There's no proposal to change the existing zones in this particular bylaw, but just to point out that there's no restriction on the number of zones, and it's usually dependent on the type of land use that has to be regulated, and in some cases, specialized zones for specialized purposes. The bylaw has to comply with the township and county official plan and be consistent. Next slide, please. Be consistent with the provincial policy statement. So this slide here gives you some idea of what the pyramid is that the Planning Act is kind of the overall overarching legislation that applies. The provincial policy statement is a provincial statement that reflects provincial interests, such as the need to protect aggregates as a resource for extraction, the need to protect water quality of lakes and rivers, the need to ensure that heritage buildings are protected, and so forth. Then the next level is the county official plan, which in this case applies to all of Frontenac County. There are policies in that plan that apply locally, and so they have to be taken into consideration, along with the more detailed policies of the township official plan. So that's the next level down. And in fact, the county of Frontenac has provided in great detail a letter or a report, if you wish, that indicates what their concerns are and what the concerns in the township official plan are and how they have been addressed or not addressed in the update to the zoning bylaw. And then finally, there's the zoning bylaw itself. Next slide. Zoning is more than regulation. Zoning is about the kind of municipality we want to create or sustain. This is a beautiful municipality in many respects. It's got a large number of lakes, which I call the gems in the crown. And they are the reason why many people have chosen to locate their residence, have chosen to come to live, have chosen to come and do business in Central Frontenac. There are many characteristics to the municipality that are attractive and important, and zoning can affect those, such as whether the community is visually attractive and appealing. I've been through some municipalities, and I'm sure people here have as well, where you wouldn't want to locate because people don't take care of their properties. There's vacant cars strewn all over the place. There are just no attention paid to the visual impact on the passerby, or for that matter, those that might be interested in investing in your municipality. So residents and the municipality that take pride in the visual appearance of their municipality are going to be more successful in attracting development to their municipality. Municipality also has to be healthy and livable, meaning it's safe for children to walk around their neighborhoods, maybe walk to school as the case may be. It's safe from an enforcement standpoint, in the sense that you don't have areas in the municipality that might be attractive to a criminal element because of areas that are obscured or not visible to the passing public, things of that nature. A municipality that thinks about its environment is very important because, in fact, we are the environment. We're not separate from the environment. You use the resources of the environment, water, and you dispose of your wastes, whether it's sewage or other, into the water. So there's an interaction there back and forth. And one of the reasons why this is such a great place to live is because you have taken care of the environment. And that's one of the key underlying themes to both your official plan and your zoning bylaw, is to protect that environment, protect water quality, because water quality means that you can enjoy swimming in the lake, you can enjoy fishing in the lake, and you don't have to worry about algae blooms, things of that nature, which in turn affect your property values, by the way. So maintaining the environment also has a direct impact on investment and on the conservation of your property values. So I can't stress that more. I would also say that any decision that's made by the municipality or an individual property owner is a 100-year decision. Because when buildings are constructed on a property, they're built there for a long occupancy period. And in fact, anything that's on the landscape will outlast any of you here today. So it's important that if we're making a 100-year decision, and if you can think about the indigenous side of it, they talk about 7 generations, the same sort of concept. A 100-year decision is a long-term decision. So it's important to make the right decision when you're developing a property, maintaining as much of the natural vegetation as is possible, because as I think we all know, the impact of climate change is affected by tree cover. The greater the tree cover, the more sequestering of carbon occurs, the greater the protection for groundwater and other resources as a result of the overlying canopy. The zoning bylaw also sets out standards, community standards, it's what I call them, something that perhaps differentiates you from another municipality. So as an example, storage containers in some municipalities are not permitted in residential areas at all, because that municipality feels it maybe have a negative impact, I guess, on visually or for other reasons. Other municipalities allow storage containers, or they may control them in a way to make them as compatible as is possible within their own residential neighborhoods. So that's a community standard. Parking of commercial vehicles is another example. Some municipalities will allow them in a residential area, others will not, because the community has said to make our community visually attractive, livable, and so forth, we don't want certain things in our neighborhood or in our community. So a number of standards in the bylaw are effectively local standards, standards that are applicable here in Central Frontenac, but may not be in North Frontenac or the islands, as the case may be. Next slide, please. I'd like to get into the structure of the zoning bylaw then, and this is a structure that's existed since the adoption of the original bylaw. You have 5 sections: the administration, compliance, definitions, general provisions, zones, and then you have the zoning schedules. So those are all of the components of the zoning bylaw, and I'll deal with each of these in turn. Next section. So the administration section is a section that identifies the administrative requirements and controls and the relationship to other bylaws. For instance, it says that even though you comply with the zoning bylaw, there may be another bylaw that you also have to comply with. It might be a fencing bylaw, parking bylaw, licensing bylaw, or something of that sort. So just because you comply with zoning doesn't necessarily say you comply with other applicable legislation. Sewage disposal, of course, is extremely important. You have to obtain a permit from another agency for sewage disposal, but I think the township is going to be taking that responsibility as well. The administration section says that the bylaw applies to all of Central Frontenac, not just a specific area, and it indicates how it's to be enforced. So the changes that have been made to this particular section clarify the requirements for an application for a building permit, what information that may be required by the building official or the planner in order to determine compliance with the zoning bylaw. It also removes some, what I would say, overlap with the Planning Act with respect to penalties and inspection processes. They were put in the bylaw originally for ease of understanding, but they're not necessary because they are set out in the Planning Act itself. Next section. Next slide. Can you flip that one to just move forward to the next one? There's a slide that's out of order. Okay, so the section 2 is the compliance section, and this is probably the single most important section in the bylaw in the sense that it says that you must comply with whatever you're proposing to build. You must comply with the zoning bylaw for whatever you propose to build in the municipality. And changes are provided to the explanatory notes in this particular section because there have been changes to the Planning Act since the original bylaw was adopted. So we've provided explanatory notes in several places in the bylaw to make it easier and more user-friendly for people in reading the bylaw. And they can, for instance, find out what the process is for submitting an application for rezoning. So the process is set out, or minor variance as the case may be. And other changes have been made to names of organizations or whatever that are affected. So the Ontario Municipal Board, the OMB, no longer exists. It's been replaced by the Ontario Land Tribunal. And section 2 also talks to a new section in the Planning Act, and that's the requirements for a municipality to actually refund application fees where they haven't met the timeline set out in the Planning Act for processing an application. This is Mr. Ford's intent to expedite approvals for affordable housing as an example, and maybe other uses as well. So that's brand new. The municipality will have to think about how that affects their operation, because certainly they need the revenues in order to process applications. So perhaps we can flip back to the definitions. Okay. The definitions section is also an important section of the bylaw. It's probably one of the longest, and it sets out definitions for words that are not typically found in Webster's or some other dictionary. So they're unique to land uses in a municipality. And what we've done for convenience to the public is to italicize in bold script the words that have been identified as they appear throughout the bylaw. So a number of new definitions have been added to the existing definitions. Again, partly because we're modernizing, updating the bylaw, and there are new uses that are kicking around that didn't exist before. So next slide, I'm going just to pass through a couple of these just to indicate, you can see the range of definitions that are here. I don't intend to get into any of them per se, but just to indicate that they're here. Green energy industries or geothermal power facility. I mean, those are examples of responding to climate change interests, trying to provide for the opportunity to install alternative energy power sources, that sort of thing, or even to encourage industry that is based on providing green energy, or green products, green products to individuals. So we'll pass on to the revised definitions. Again, we went through all of the definitions, and some of them did require updating. And a good example is the place of worship. We're finding across Ontario, if not Canada, a situation where churches are being repurposed to include religious use as well as other uses, residential, commercial in some cases. And we want to ensure that that versatility or flexibility is available here should that be necessary. For example, there's one United Church closing every week in Canada, which is unfortunate, but there are lots of conversions that are occurring. So there was a need to change the definition of place of worship to include or incorporate a mixed use potential. Next slide, please. So moving on to the general provisions, this section sets out in detail the requirements and standards that may apply universally, regardless of the zone. And you've got some examples here. The diagrams that are shown on the bottom. The left-hand side is the diagram that relates to barrier-free parking. So regardless of what zone you're in, there may be need for that type of parking, and so there's a standard. And on the right-hand side, there's the standard for a sight triangle, again, which applies universally to ensure that when you approach a stop sign in the municipality, you can see visually either way whether traffic is coming. That's a safety issue. Next slide. So proposed amendments or changes to the general provisions include a variety of matters related to climate change, providing alternative and renewable energy systems, ensuring that if you want to install a solar collector, that's fine. If you want to install a geothermal system, that's fine. If you want to install a micro turbine on your property to generate electricity, that's fine as well. We're providing exemptions for air force heat pumps as a means of providing energy as well. Providing for zero energy buildings and for EV charging stations universally in the municipality. So we attempted again to ensure that your bylaw is sensitive to climate change policies in the official plan as well as in the provincial policy statement. And one of the other changes is to encourage and provide for local food production. So people that want to get into backyard chickens, that's fine. Community gardens is a way of providing an area for growing vegetables and plants and things of that nature. So that's also permitted. So again, trying to adapt to the times is important. Next slide. One of the requirements of the Planning Act and the provincial policy statement is to increase the opportunity for affordable housing through a number of different ways. But the legislation that was introduced in 2016 and has been even changed since then is to provide for additional residential units. So say you have a single detached dwelling in the village here, you will also be entitled for that dwelling to have it could be called a granny suite or an apartment. It could be on the main floor or in the basement, as the case may be. And in addition, you are allowed to have another or an additional residential unit in an accessory building in the rear yard of your property. So that means that instead of restricting residential units to one per property, it ends up being three. Now, there are certain conditions that must be met, but essentially that's a key change in order to encourage provision or delivery of affordable housing in your municipality. We've also, and the zones that are listed, the R1, RM, R, LSR, and rural zones, those are all zones in which additional residential units are permitted. The residential waterfront community zone, is not an area where it's permitted, largely because of the environmental or potential environmental impact on water quality. We want to ensure that the density along our water bodies is such that we're not going to impair the phosphorus loading and an impact on the water bodies. A second item that's been introduced in this bylaw is the concept of a tiny house, and I think you've probably heard about this. It's a provision that's made for in the policies in your official plan. So a tiny house is a way of providing a small house that people can inhabit. Usually it could be one person, a couple of people, not usually a family per se, but one or two. And it's tiny house is obviously much more affordable because of the cost being less than a typical conventional single family dwelling or residential dwelling. And the minimum floor area for a tiny house will be 300 square feet or 27.87 meters squared. Next slide. The existing bylaw. Okay.
And exclusion from residential waterfront zone. So can you explain it a little bit further? Because I'm assuming that if you're building one of these units, you need a permit. And then if you need a permit, you need to have adequate sewage treatment. So that creates, I mean,
Can we have your name, please?
Okay, so the question that's been raised here is why not allow additional residential units on a waterfront property? What has happened historically in this municipality is the development, as it's not exclusive to this particular municipality, are assessments that determine the capacity or limit to development on a lake. So X number of units would be permitted on a lake. And by tripling the number of units through additional dwellings may easily impair the water quality. If you were to want to install additional units, what likely would be required is an environmental assessment at a very, very significant cost to a homeowner to determine whether an additional unit might be permitted. As you know, and there are certain water bodies within Central Frontenac where no further development is permitted on a lake because the carrying capacity, the biological carrying capacity has been reached. If somebody wants to install an additional unit in a waterfront residential zone, I would say that the township will likely require an environmental assessment. It's not a simple matter. And if you triple the number of units that could be permitted, that may disenfranchise somebody who has a vacant lot on a waterfront property and can't develop that because you've suddenly allowed a large number of new units arbitrarily elsewhere on the lake. So the intent here is to, going back to my comment earlier about conserving the environmental amenities or attributes of your community, that is one of them, is to ensure that there is a correlation between the development that you're proposing and sustaining the natural environmental of the municipality.
Further question?
But in that zone, you can put a plane house, you can have a sleep cabin, and they can have septic systems. So you're allowing two things, but you're not allowing the other thing that looks ridiculous.
Well, there is a considerable difference because a sleep cabin is something that's associated with the dwelling. It's not a separate dwelling. It's not a different dwelling unit. It's an accessory structure, and the septic system has to be incorporated into the existing system that services the principal dwelling. And again, it's, as I say, it's accessory. It's not a separate residential unit. When we're talking about additional residential units, you're talking about separately self-sustaining units, which is not the case with the bunkie or the sleep cabin. No, it's a combination of one in the dwelling and one accessory building on the property. So in the to the rear. So you have two units in the principal dwelling and you have one in the rear yard. So that's three. In an R1 zone, yes. Or an R zone, yes.
Not in the water.
But not in the waterfront, no. Okay, moving on to recreational vehicles. Recreational vehicles were actually permitted in the existing bylaw. The amendments provide, I think, a little more detail on what's permitted. And essentially, the intent is to allow them as one would typically use them. But if we are talking about an RV on a vacant lot of record, they are treated essentially the same way as a conventional dwelling. You have to make sure that you have provision for sewage treatment, and you would have to meet the setback requirements from a lake or from a side yard or rear yard, as the case may be. The provisions also provide an opportunity for the municipality to consider licensing of recreational vehicles. That's not a mandatory requirement of zoning, but the reason why the municipality may introduce licensing is because if recreational vehicles are permitted on vacant lots of record, they will use services the municipality provides, including the maintenance of roads, emergency services, and they are a cost. So the licensing fee is a way of recuperating the costs that might be associated with providing for recreational vehicles on vacant lots. Next slide. Storage containers, as I mentioned earlier, This is a new provision in the bylaw to allow storage containers in residential areas, but with certain controls. So you would be permitted one storage container not exceeding 12.1 meters or 40 feet in length. And so that would be comparable to some extent to a storage building, maybe even a garage for that particular matter. Storage containers will be permitted in non-residential zones. They would be considered accessory type uses subject to the setback requirements in a particular zone. So storage containers are permitted, as I say, or will be permitted. They're technically not permitted now because as I indicated earlier, if the bylaw doesn't state a use, then it's de facto prohibited. So storage containers are technically not permitted in the municipality right now, but council will rectify that with the amendment that's proposed. Next slide. Buffering is a requirement of the official plan, largely to ensure compatibility between land uses, so that if somebody has a commercial use or an industrial use that's to be constructed adjacent to residential use, bylaw will require buffering to provide a visual barrier, if you wish, and or maybe a noise barrier, depending on the distance as well. So buffering standards have been incorporated into the bylaw. Buffer can be vegetative, it can be a fence, it can be a berm. Next slide. A new concept in this particular bylaw is a floor space index. It's intended in the residential areas to replace the lot coverage requirements. It's essentially the same type of standard, but it's expressed in a different way. And what this particular bylaw does is to try and introduce floor space standards in a way that, depending on the size of your lot, it will tell you the extent of the coverage that might be permitted. And the intent here is to as best as is possible, ensure that there's enough land area in a zone to permit development, but or on a lot to permit development, but also to permit development that has a reasonable relationship, so that if somebody wants to build a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot home on a property and the property is large enough, so be it. So it's not intended to penalize people per se, but to ensure that there is a reasonable correlation between the density of development on an individual lot and the area of the lot itself. So the next slide indicates, as an example, in the on the left-hand side, the calculation for a floor space index for a lot on a waterfront property. And this is for a lot that's 0.8 hectares in area. And there's a particular nuance, I guess, to the requirement in the official plan to try and minimize the density of development closer to the shoreline. So within the first 60 meters back from the shoreline, the density is less than it would be overall for the lot. So within the first 60 meters, in this case, the floor space index, FSI, which is proposed at 0.5, would allow for a building of 231 square meters, or roughly 2,500 square feet in area, which should be, for the most part, reasonable for most people that are would be proposing to build on a waterfront. And that's on the first 60 meters. If part of your dwelling is to be constructed on the back of the lot, then that figure would increase. Next slide. Other provisions that are proposed, amendments that are proposed to the bylaw, is to introduce the concept of live-work units. And again, this is a new provision in the official plan that has to be implemented through the bylaw. And essentially, a live-work unit is a residential unit that has a workspace that's larger than what you might see in a home-based business. So the workspace could be 55% of the dwelling unit area, floor area. And so it's designed to encourage economic development at a scale that is not incompatible with adjacent residential units or whatever the adjacent land use is. So it says it's a new concept, but it's designed so if somebody wants to set up a business in their dwelling that they're going to own and operate and operate the business in the unit, then that would be permitted. And the list of the types of businesses that are permitted is included in the bylaw. We've stolen to some extent the standards that are set out in the North Frontenac zoning bylaw for this type of use. And they're not dissimilar to actually the standards that I've drafted for for them as well as for your municipality. And we have added some additional flexibility by allowing an accessory building to be used for workspace. So the original concept of live work is to have everything in the same dwelling unit, but we recognize that some people may want to have the workspace area in an accessory building to the rear of the principal dwelling. And that accessory building might be a garage that's been converted or a building that is specifically designed for this work unit. Next slide. The natural heritage features, this section has been deleted from the original bylaw, but there are a couple of provisions that have been retained to ensure that there's sufficient distance separation from development to a provincially significant wetland or to an unclassified wetland. Wetlands are vital to our environment, as you are all likely aware, and it's important that they be protected from development that might negate the benefit of a wetland. So the distance separation from a provincially significant wetland is 120 meters, and from an unclassified wetland is 30 meters. Next slide. The natural heritage features are something that it's questionable whether there is authority under the Planning Act to regulate them. And the other aspect about it as well is that establishing distance separations is difficult because except for these specific ones here, because one would have to do an assessment as to what the natural heritage feature is, such as it could be anything from a butternut tree to the nest of a rat snake, any endangered or threatened species. It's hard to know what the impact of development will be without an on-site environmental assessment. Well, your zoning bylaw can't stipulate what that setback will be if it's unknown. Your zoning bylaw, as I indicated earlier, is a very specific document. So if you want to set out a standard, then you have to know what that standard is going to be. Well, you would not know it if you don't know exactly where the habitat is of an endangered species, and without an assessment to determine how that species is to be protected.
Yes, go ahead.
No, I said it was. Yes. It is the PPS. Okay, is enabled by yes.
And so I'm asking the same question, why was it such a leap?
Well, as I indicated, if you're talking about a significant wildlife, in many circumstances here, we don't know where they are because there has not in this municipality, the natural heritage information features and areas information is something that was provided to us by MNR 15 years ago. However, there has not been a comprehensive study done in this municipality to establish what's known as a natural heritage system. It would be nice to do. It's an expensive proposition, and it's only through that kind of study where you are able to determine more specifically wildlife habitat areas to be protected, fish habitat areas to be protected. So it's extremely difficult to arbitrarily establish setbacks where you don't know where those features are. That's right. No, general in general terms only. In general terms only. So.
So is there a map that shows, well, how do you know which is special and which is not special? But as far as the 120 meter by 30 meters, how do you know that? Or how does this person find that?
Well, the one study there is a provincially significant wetland that was established through a study undertaken by the province. Okay, so that's why this is acknowledged in the zoning bylaws. So that work was done, and that wetland is shown on the schedule. I don't know which schedule here, but that's right, exactly. Any other wetland is unclassified, and it could go through the same process. Again, we're dealing with, I guess, the resources that are available at any given point to evaluate this or that. So, as I said, no comprehensive evaluation was done of all wetlands in the municipality. The 30-meter setback from unclassified wetlands actually is in the existing bylaw. It's been there since for the last decade. Okay, the next is related to shoreline buffers. Again, this is a provision that is somewhat of a carryover, but the intent here is to try and protect your lakes through maintaining a 30-meter setback for shoreline development, and that includes sewage treatment systems as well, but also providing the flexibility or versatility, if you wish, to allow access to waterfront for the purposes of launching your boat, building docks, building boathouses, as the case may be. So the shoreline activity area, which is the area along the shoreline of the front of your property, can be developed as long as the width of the development is not more than 25% of the frontage of your shoreline area. And the next slide kind of shows that concept. It's too neat in my mind to in terms of the layout, as but it does give the concept here of setback of a building and of the shoreline activity area that can be developed for dock or access purposes. The intent, of course, is to preserve as much of the shoreline vegetation in the what we call the ribbon of life, which is that first 30 meters back from the shoreline. Again, going back to my earlier comment about the importance of a canopy, but also protecting wildlife habitat in that area, wildlife corridors and things of that nature. Moving to the next slide, please. There are a number of prohibited uses that are set out in the bylaw, such as an adult entertainment and body rub parlor. I can tell you a story about that you may want to hear it or you may not. Obnoxious uses, storage of unlicensed decommissioned vehicles, use of vehicles for human habitation, bulk storage of used tires, heavy industrial uses, and bulk storage of hazardous materials. I think a lot of these are fairly common sense, but it goes back to my earlier comment about the quality of life in this municipality and the importance of protecting it for those that live here year-round or seasonally. Next slide. Temporary uses are also permitted, and they've been extended to include temporary sales or rental offices for somebody that wants to build a model home, and temporary accommodation for immigrant farming employees if that happens in your municipality. So kinds that support the agricultural industry, small as it is in Central Frontenac. Next slide, sorry. So moving on to the zone section, yes, the mayor is looking at the number of slides I have here. I'm trying to move forward here as quickly as possible. There's been no change to the zone classification of the number of types of zones, as I mentioned earlier. The scope of permitted uses and accessory uses has been amended in some of the zones, not to add a lot of new uses. So in the R1 zone, a tiny house has been added as permitted use. In the residential multiple zone, there's been no change to the main uses. In the residential waterfront zone, a modular home, park, model facility, and tiny home have been added to the list of permitted uses. The minimum lot area has been reduced from the 0.8 hectares, has been reduced to 0.8 from the 1 hectare that was in the previous bylaw. And that's based on the official plan. And as well, the water frontage has been reduced from 91 meters to 77. Next slide. In the commercial Cs, sorry?
Does zoning bylaw have anything to do with or may regulate boats on lakes?
No. No, the municipality does not have the authority to regulate boats on lakes or floating structures on lakes. That's correct. Yeah. I guess my experience is that it's largely lake associations and working with property owners that build in their own restrictions. Some are quite successful, some are not. So if a lake association doesn't want power boats or whatever, it's dependent on that association of working with property owners to permit or prohibit those kinds of uses. But it's strictly private. It's not a municipal issue that can be enforced by the municipality. Yes, the municipality doesn't own the water. I mean, speeding on lakes, of course, can be regulated by through the OPP. There's a marine unit that does that. Question at the back. That can be regulated. We're making the distinction between floating structures and docks. So that's right. So a floating dock, though, even a floating dock is attached to the shoreline. Okay. So the bylaws specifically indicates that you have to have a 5-meter setback from the extension of the neighbor's or your property line into the water. So that avoids situations where your dock or somebody else's dock infringes on your waterfront.
Your name, please. What was it? So, Kendra? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in the commercial zone, there's been minor additions to the scope of uses, adding an animal shelter, green energy industries, live work units, refreshment sales vehicle, tourist outfitters establishment. In the commercial recreational zone, which I think there was a question from Mr. Steele. What does that mean? It's really commercial type uses oriented to the tourist industry that are permitted in that particular zone. New uses that have been added to that particular zone include an adventure game, a brewery, a winery, driving range, golf course, and a live work unit as well. The local commercial zone live work unit has been added. And in the business development zone, bank and refreshment sales vehicles have been added as permitted uses. Question?
It is.
The commercial, possibly recreational.
It's
We talked about adoption funds and
Yeah.
things short-term rentals, are increasing within the municipality as some kind of a zoning to alleviate the negative impacts to the some landowners would be appreciated.
Yes, we have explored that particular subject with the council. It is a complex issue. The council does want to deal with it, but they put it on pause to be able to work out a solution. I think that is compatible with what's going on in adjacent municipalities. There is a group of people, I guess, that have and the mayor's. The mayor can probably speak better to the issue. But the issue has been put on pause because of the complexity of it. So I would suggest that if the issue is going to be regulated at some point, there may be another amendment to the zoning bylaw in the future.
We know it's a problem.
I think the issue is STRs are really not considered commercial. And I don't think we can zone them as commercial.
Well, I'm not sure that there's an easy solution. They may or may not be, but it's as I say, it's an issue that is relatively complex, and I think the council wants to get it right. They don't want to put in into the bylaw some standards that may not be appropriate. The other issue, and this is a very serious issue as well, is enforcement. If a municipality is going to put these kinds of controls in the bylaw, they have to be prepared to enforce them. And so staff resources may not. In fact, I don't believe at this particular time are sufficient to be able to administer whatever might be required for short-term rentals. So we specifically, as the council specifically has said, let's put this on pause. We're not going to ignore it, but let's work out a solution that is universal in the county, if possible. And so that it's not different in North Frontenac from Central Frontenac, and make sure that the solution is a workable solution.
This zoning, I mean, what's required to do that?
First of all, Vivian, we don't know where they all are. We have to take an inventory of where these properties are. And that in itself is going to be a horrendous job just to get who's where and what they're doing. There are some good short-term rentals. And we do need accommodation here, but we need good accommodation where they don't disrupt the neighborhood to come in. So I am working with North and South. The islands aren't involved, but North, Central, and South, we are working together to try and come up with something that we can deal with the bad ones. The good ones aren't a problem. So, but we decided that zoning wasn't the way to do it at this point. So stay tuned. It is on the burner for sure.
Okay, the industrial zones, I'm not going to spend much time here. There's very little change, but there's been some additions to permitted uses in those particular zones. In the rural zone, there's a number of additional uses have been added, including an animal shelter, a brewery, a camp, communications facility, conservation uses, construction yard, daycare, day nursery, geothermal power facility, a modular home, a tiny house, a helipad, hobby farm, institutional use, kennel, log hauling operation, logging camp, nature trail, park, playground, renewable energy system, uses that may exist in or typically would exist in rural areas. And the lot area in the rural area has been reduced from 0.8 hectares as a minimum lot area to from 1 hectare. In other zones, next slide, the EP zone, environmental protection zone, it's not quite correct to say there have been no changes because we've restructured that particular zone to differentiate between provincially significant wetlands, ANSIs, conservation areas, and crown land. So the schedules that you will see, and a lot of work has been done so far in doing it, will show that differentiation. In the LSR zone, there's additional permitted uses include a modular home, park model home, tiny house, and a live work unit. And again, the minimum lot area has been reduced from what's in the existing bylaw. The final zone that I want to mention here is the White Lake zone. We've been working with the Cottage Association there, who are very concerned about the impacts of development on White Lake. So that particular zone has been modified, or that particular subzone, I think is probably the best way to describe it. So new permitted uses include a modular home, park model trailer, fish culture station, which effectively reflects what's there now, and a tiny house. But uses that have been proposed to be prohibited are largely commercial in nature, whether it's a camp or campground, a float plane hangar, marina, the use of a recreational vehicle on a vacant lot, a tourist cabin establishment, a tourist establishment, or tourist outfitters. And one additional important change there is to limit development around the shore to one-tier development. So backlots would not be permitted in that RWX1 zone. Zone schedules are being modified. The roads are being classified to better correspond with what's in the official plan. Past amendments will be consolidated into the schedules. So you'll see all of the, like there's some 44 amendments to the RW zone alone, which will be shown on the schedules. And the schedules are going to be more user-friendly to the extent of titling a lot of the parks and other features in the municipality.
Some rural and other things for left place of
Road access.
directly, so
So that's a one-to-one that you can have with,
Yeah, we've had a one-to-one, yes.
okay.
yeah, but I just wanted to make other people aware.
Yep. Yeah, the concern is with respect to an LSR zone is what are the access restrictions or requirements of the zoning bylaw. And the way it's structured now is that an LSR zone can be on a road that's not maintained by the municipality, not owned by the municipality, i.e. a private road, an unassumed road, so it could be a municipal road that's not been assumed for maintenance purposes, as opposed to the rural zone where access is only permitted from a public year-round maintained road.
To be pointed out here is that the KMT trail was recently upgraded. And I believe that a lot of the properties that were zoned rural are becoming changed to LSR so that people can acquire building permits. And it turns the road into a trail. This is an issue, as I told you, Ken, that affects me directly right now. So my concern is the properties that are becoming rezoned from rural to LSR. People are going to be able to acquire building permits, but my question is, the road is not or the trail is not a road, and anyone that has private property that abuts the trail that could possibly put in their own private road on their property and be granted an easement along the trail that connects to a publicly maintained road, it means that there can be possible and a lot of future development off the KMP trail. I'd like to know what you have to say about that, because it's happening to me right now, and it's personally affecting me in a major way. And if the proposal that's right now in front of the council that I've been addressing, if it gets passed, it seems to me that anyone that has property that abuts the Santee Trail and can build a private road on their property could be granted an easement along the trail to a publicly maintained road, virtually turning the trail into a road where construction vehicles can use it to build homes. I just want you to address that because it's a huge concern of mine.
I wish,
What's possible where the trail was upgraded, but now that the trail has been upgraded. Madam Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know what you said.
I just said that it,
You can say it to me.
I certainly can, Julie. I said it has always been possible to ask for a zone change to LSR from whatever your property is, and then it would go to the Committee of Adjustment who would deal with it. Okay, let's let Glenn answer that, Julie. I think we've got the whole issue. Glenn?
There's lots of people that have the property off the trail without an easement. We're talking about what's happening in my proposal, where an easement has already been granted so that the people can rezone to LSR and build it.
I'm not going to address your issues specifically because I'm not going to take up people's time to do that. We've had a discussion, but I will correct you in saying that it is not the intent of the municipality to convert the KMP trail to a road that provides multiple or access, if you wish, to multiple properties. That's not the intent. It's not classified as a road, and it's.
Put in a private lane and to give it an easement and build.
The plan. I would point out the Planning Act doesn't mean that if you adopt a zoning bylaw, that's the be all and the end all. There's an amendment process under the Planning Act. So it doesn't matter whether you're in an LSR zone, a rural zone, some other zone somewhere, anywhere in the municipality. If you want to develop and there's a legitimate reason for allowing the development, then you may apply for a rezoning to do that. And the municipality will look on the development on its merits, its own merits, which may be different from an adjacent to property. So there must be planning justification for a decision that's made by the municipality before that development is permitted. And the municipality, as I say, looks on each application on its own basis, site-specific basis, and the merits of that application and moving forward. There may not be merits in some applications, and they may be refused, and that's why there's an appeal process. Well, what you're asking is whether there can be a condition and an easement or maintenance of that easement. Well, that can be a condition of approval. on a site-specific basis, on a single property basis. The municipality has the authority to do that, but that doesn't necessarily say that anybody else has the same permission or authority to develop. As I say, it's on an individual as merits basis, or on a merits basis that they would look at an application.
And we need to move on. Vivian?
So I noticed that, around the Waterfront, Shoreline is an example. There's
There is recognition that there's a need to change some of those properties. The change in the official plan stipulated that properties within 150 meters of the waterfront of a lake, okay, should be put into a residential waterfront zone as opposed to the rural zone in order to be consistent. So, this is a huge municipality. There's lots of lakes, and you try and do the best you can with the schedules and the zones that have been laid out on the schedules. Nothing is absolutely perfect all the time. So we recognize that there is an issue, and we're trying to rectify that as part of this update, is to ensure that those properties that qualify as waterfront properties should be zoned RW as opposed to rural.
There's a very, very large parcel adjacent to the park that's zoned rural. It's
That'd be
600 acres,
that would be Crown.
and no, it's not correct.
Not Crown.
We know who owns it.
Okay.
Anyway, so I just say prior to the meetings, I mean, it's easy to see what is what. You would think that to be consistent, the zoning would have changed and people would have had an option to comment on that, but you're not going to go backwards. So I'm assuming that as you have it mapped now, that's how it's going to be. Not just people that have those properties in advance.
No, that's why we have these public consultation sessions, is for these kinds of issues to be raised. And I really appreciate you raising the concerns so that the public are aware of it. There is also certainly an onus on property owners. Okay, when the municipality proposes to update its bylaw, there's an onus on them to come forward and verify that the zoning on their property is the appropriate zoning. And but I mean, the municipality is only required to have one open house meeting. We're having two, so we're giving people the opportunity on 2 occasions to come forward. And as I said, the municipality is reviewing its schedules. It's not an easy task to review the schedules for the entire municipality, and we're trying to make changes that are consistent, okay, so that if you're zoned residential waterfront or whatever, you're consistent with the approach that's being used for the balance of waterfront properties, that type of thing. So it is a process. Time is an issue, time and resources. We're trying to work forward to resolving these. I will give you the assurance that the council is not going to adopt the bylaw if they're not comfortable with all of the changes that are being proposed on the schedules. They're going to want to make sure that the schedules are updated before they make that crucial decision. So, yeah.
So there will be after today. Yeah, this is draft. We're gathering and then we'll make changes. Sorry, I'm supposed to use the mic. We're
Which-
gathering information
which
and then we'll make changes.
probably brings in the next slide here, and there you go, you see. Revisions arising from public and indigenous consultation. So there's the line right there, my lady. Then
Next slide.
the statutory public meeting, final revisions, and then adoption. So that's the process, the where to from here. And that says, have your say. Well, that's why we're here, is to listen to you. We're all ears type thing. And I would point out that there are comment sheets that are available. And I would encourage you to use those to add any additional comments or raise questions or whatever that haven't been discussed here. Those comment sheets can be dropped off now, or they can be dropped off at the township office at a later point in time.
And just to add to that too, you have email addresses. You can send your comments by email and we'll make sure they get to the planner as well.
One thing before we move away from the meeting, Sarah, do you mind checking to see if there's any online participants that have any questions? If there's anyone who has joined us virtually who wishes to ask a question, they can use the raise hand feature. I'm not sure if we have anyone virtually or not. No, we do not. Okay, that answers that question.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Or Glenn, do you have another closing slide? No?
The last slide was questions.
Julie, this is the last time where if it's your particular issue. Okay, all right. Yes. Yes,
And the zone bylaw.
at the bottom. Yes,
And then of the zoning bylaw.
Yes.
So is my understanding.
No, the official plan is a policy document that sets out the vision of the municipality. The zoning bylaw is a regulatory document, as I say, where the rubber hits the road, must comply with the official plan. But you, yeah, so. Yeah, it has to comply with the policies of the official plan.
okay. If there's nothing else, it is 2:22. We're losing a beautiful day out there, but thank you all very much for coming. And please send us any comments you have that you didn't make today. Thank you again. Bye-bye.